8 of the biggest names in WWE history have been presented in documentary form through A&E's famous Biography series. As WWE's partnership with A&E continues to grow, we here at the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast are going to take a deep dive into these 8 legends and give you our thoughts on their careers and what they mean to the legacy of pro wrestling. All of that on this edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. The bomb drops now. Hello and welcome to this special old school edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, the show that is for the fans, by the fans. We appreciate you hanging out with us, whether you are watching us on YouTube or whether you're listening on a traditional audio format. Thank you so much for doing that. We greatly appreciate it. I am Mr. Podcasting, your phenomenal host, Chris Belcher, and joining me is my tag team partner, my brother from another mother, the whole podcasting show, Jared Justice, is in the house. Mr. Old School, I couldn't do the show without you, man. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. On the mend. You can probably tell my voice sounds a little bit froggy, but I'm doing better. Doing better.
You just sound like doot.
All right.
So we have a very special podcast for you guys. We are talking all about the A&E Biography series, and what I wanted to do on this very special show. Well, before we get to our special guest, let me run down our usual business. Make sure you follow us on social media. We are at PBW Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow me at Chris Belcher 24. I'll flash it up there on the screen for you on all those platforms as well. Make sure you buy a t-shirt from us, ProWrestlingTees.com/PBW Podcast. Our shows drop every Monday and Wednesday. Do us a favor and subscribe on whatever platform that you are listening on and give us a 5-star review. That helps the show out. We greatly appreciate it. All right, Jared, let's bring in our very special guest for this A&E Biography series. Ladies and gentlemen, making his debut on this season of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, it's my dad, Billy Belcher. How's it going, Dad?
If Jared's old school, I'm ancient school.
Oh my goodness! Jared? Can we call you Stu Hart? Yeah, yeah. Stu Hart. Yeah.
I don't do impressions.
Yeah, I don't
want to make him mad. He's going to stretch us.
Oh my gosh! I remember those days.
Just put your hand back here. There.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Let me just tell you. Yeah, I was getting ready to say that, Dad. We're not to the Brett documentary yet, but when Stu started talking in the Brett documentary, I just about lost it because I was like, oh my gosh, all these impressions are spot on. This is fantastic. This is actually what Stu sounds like. It was great. I enjoyed it. All right. So before we get to all the biographies, though, this WWE is really, they went mainstream back in like 2001 or whatever, but the mainstream relationships for WWE have really grown, especially through the pandemic. And one of those is with A&E. Not only are they doing the biography series, but the WWE Most Wanted Treasures show follows the biography series. And that really helps them open up to a whole new fan base because, you know, it's a show where they bring wrestlers in and they go search for their memorabilia that they may have lost or given away or sold or whatever over the years. And they tell really awesome stories along the way. And I know we're all three fans of the show. Jared, you mentioned to me early on that you felt like that this show, Most Wanted Treasures, is like a wrestling version of Pawn Stars.
Well,
right?
American Pickers.
American Pickers. Sorry, that's right.
American Pickers and, well, just about anything on the History Channel I'm down with. The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, check that out. But, yeah, I mean, it's like WWE, one of my favorites, has combined with American Pickers, and I guess you could even maybe bring in Pawn Stars, another one of my favorites. And they've created this show that at first I was like, I don't know if I'm going to watch that. Then I watched it and I was like, man, I have to keep watching it. I mean, it's awesome.
It's one of those things that you can't quit watching because you don't know what stories these guys are going to tell. Like there's a lot of stories on there that I've heard, but many more of them that I had not heard. Dad, what's your thoughts on this show and just kind of the progression that it's gone over the last 7-8 episodes?
Well, it's really good. It's surprising that there's so many people out there that are wrestling fans, has so much memorabilia that it's just unreal. And the prices they're paying for it, it's unreal. You would think that the wrestlers, like The Undertaker, didn't have hardly any. His was all by WWE. They kept his because he never threw any out in the crowd, left any, or did anything like that, like the rest of them did. So it was an interesting show. And I'll have to say, I think there's been 8 shows.
Something like that, yeah.
7 of the 8 were really, really, really good. The last one was mediocre. If
you haven't watched the Brutus Beefcake and Greg Valentine, if you haven't watched that one, do yourself a favor and don't.
Yeah, because they move like tortoises.
Oh my God. BTFBB.
BTFBB. That's it.
They don't get very much. They don't go after very interesting memorabilia. But
we have Greg LaValentine's shin guard.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That was a big piece, and I don't know why.
Not to go too far in like a rabbit hole discussion on this, but it's what we do here on the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. We go down rabbit holes. I know that we have all watched all the episodes, and I'm going to put you guys on the spot. If you can think of what was your favorite piece of memorabilia that was the most interesting to you that they chased down, and I will say mine was the neck brace of Andy Kaufman. The way that they were able to chase that down in the Jerry Lawler episode where they got it from Bill Apter and all this other stuff, I thought that was really, really cool and a really unique piece that I would not have expected them to be able to dig up. Dad, what do you think? What was your favorite thing?
Well, all the stuff is really cool. And there's a lot of stuff like the Undertaker's original urn, things like that. But what really, really impressed me, and of course, I can't remember, we were probably there when the Unabomber come to Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Yeah, we were. Yep.
And his mask and all that. And he didn't even know he was going to find that. And he found out that's the most coolest thing I've seen yet.
Yeah.
It really is.
Especially with the 3 of us and our connection to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And the least thing, I guess, is the shin guard. Or Jake the Snake's bag. He carried a snake in. You can get one of them anywhere.
Jared, what do you think?
I love it, first of all, that we have Father and things like that. And then we have Junior.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
I liked Mick Foley's his original Mankind leather piece that he wore across his chest, the upper part to his whole ensemble. I thought that was pretty cool because I really didn't know that there was like an original leather piece and then there was like different renditions as it went along.
Right.
That was pretty cool to learn that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how many of these things that evolve and how they evolve over the time that, because they talk about on this show that wrestling gear gets sweaty and you have to replace it and some things break and you got to travel with it and yada, yada, yada. So it's really interesting how smart these guys are. They can pick out which one was actually the original, which one wasn't. And like I said, how it evolves. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of all those episodes, except of course the Greg Valentine shin guard and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so let's get to why we're here, the A&E biographies on all 8 of these guys. Before we dive deep into it, it's really interesting that I want to make sure that I preface everybody and that they understand that each of these episodes, if you've watched all 8 of them, which I highly recommend that you do, they were created and produced by someone different. All 8 episodes were created and produced differently. Was not all the same people. which on one hand, it's interesting. On one hand, it's kind of a bummer because I feel like it should have all been uniform, but that's just me being picky. One of the other things that stood out to me, I want to get your guys' take on this because we all have our opinions about Dave Meltzer. These documentaries are, I'm just saying, these documentaries are all WWE approved. These were all put together with the relationship between A&E and WWE. Yet Dave Meltzer seems to be on almost every single one of them. Jared, is that weird to you at all? Or is it just, hey, he knows his stuff, let's put him on here?
Man, I think that over the years, Dave Meltzer, the people that he's had contact with are probably some of the higher ups in WWE now. I mean, I don't think we'll ever find out 100% for sure over the years who's told him what, but it seems like that he's definitely made some of the correct friends in the higher ups of WWE to be included in every single one of these. And so, Bruce may hate Dave Meltzer or at least act like it. But does he really? I mean, Bruce is pretty high up. He could say, nah, take him off. And they'd probably take him off. But he did.
That's true. That's true.
Interesting.
That's one of the things that I thought about too. Dad, what do you think?
Well, Meltzer is like everybody else. They have their own version of what happened.
Sure.
What happened, Vince would say something, then Dave may spin it a little different way, but you have to give him credit for he's always around. He's got some good tidbits. Whether they're completely 100% accurate, that remains to be seen sometimes. Okay. And he has his favorites and not favorites.
Right.
But the one thing I like about him is I can give 5 stars or 4 stars any match going just like he did. He just got an opinion.
Right.
But he dives in there and does. That's what he does for a living. But if you've seen in the biography, you've seen his office, that's about how scattered he is.
That's true. That's very, very true.
He looked he looked like the people on Hoarders. Papers to the ceiling.
It doesn't surprise me at all. It's no wonder he can't find any accurate information. It's buried somewhere. Anyway, besides the point. It's beside the point. Anyway, let's get into it. The first biography that aired in this series of 8 was arguably the one they had to kick it off with. The biggest superstar, in my opinion, of the 8, and my favorite wrestler is in this, but it's the one they had to kick it off with. It's Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I want to run down a couple of points for each of these things. Jared, I'll start with you because you're a big Stone Cold fan and you know a lot about the history of Stone Cold, and you and I have gone back and forth, and we've done podcast episodes on the history of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Was there anything in the biography episode that maybe stood out to you that you weren't familiar with about Austin, or that you didn't know, or just something maybe that you knew a little bit about, but they went even more in depth about and you learned about it?
Honestly, no. It seemed like, especially with Stone Cold, most everything I'd already heard. I was hoping that they would include more information about the relationship between him and Deborah and things about that relationship and this and that. But of course they didn't. But most stuff, it seems like I already knew about those Stone Cold that they presented.
Yeah, that Deborah relationship is a tough line, definitely, to walk on, especially because of what happened and everything. Dad, what about you? I know you've never been like the biggest of Stone Cold fans.
Well, no, I beg to differ with you.
Okay.
I like Stone Cold, especially when you hear the glass break. You know the man's coming.
That's true.
The thing about it is, just every wrestler they talked about with Stone Cold, he's a loner and he doesn't talk a whole lot about his family. I guess that's why he didn't get to thinking about Deborah, his kids, all that. He was sort of a lone ranger out there by himself.
That's true.
And he just don't open up to a lot of people. But
that's true.
I thought it was interesting that they left out, and I found this through my research, that he was a really good friend of Chyna, and he was an advocate for her, for the way the WWE did her, and he was on her side. and he was a really good advocate and a friend for her.
That's really interesting.
And another thing was that when Sean had his problems, when he was at his lowest, Stone Cold was right with him, helping him out through it. So I dug that information up and thought that might be useful. You know,
well,
it wasn't on the biography.
Right. It goes to show you the kind of person that Stone Cold was. And just even though he was a loner, when you got close to Stone Cold, I mean, you could throw Brian Pillman into this mix because Pillman was close with Stone Cold for a long time. And those guys, you know, seemingly helped each other along in a tough time in the business. So I think Stone Cold is that kind of guy you can rely upon for that. Even though he's a loner, he's kind of the guy that when you get in his circle, you're in kind of thing. One of the things that I found really interesting about the biography was I feel like that this episode did a really nice job of giving us closure for Stone Cold Steve Austin of not having one more match. He's the one guy that he retired and he's done. He is done. And as ingrained as he was in the business and as hard as he rode, for him to accept that fact and to be content with that and not to go back for a big payday or whatever, I think that speaks volumes to who he is as well. He is a man of his word. And I thought the biography did a great job of painting that picture for us.
Well, besides Flair, I think Stone Cold is the man. He'd be number 2 on Mount Rushmore for me. Stone Cold would be. Because when you hear that glass break, you know somebody's getting their tail whooped.
Well, I mean, he's the biggest superstar of the 90s. I mean, I think he definitely, you know, mainstream in and out of the ring. It's Stone Cold. Jared, I know you would agree with that, and you'd put him up there on your Mount Rushmore as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at Stone Cold's career, I mean, he is the definition of paying your dues and coming up the right way and being a man's man and just breaking out. And he did it by himself. I mean, I'm pretty sure they covered it on the documentary. I have Moses the Wonder Dog trying to attack me here, so I'm trying to get that situated. But anyway,
Moses the Wonder Dog.
But so whenever the whole Austin 316, Stone Cold had his lip busted, had to get stitched back up. He comes back to the arena. The only heads up he got was Doc Hendricks, saying, well, Jake just cut a religious promo on you. So there you go. And Austin goes out and does the whole Austin 316 thing. And whether that you agree with it, whether you don't agree with it, you know, whether that you want to say it has religious undertones that are not appropriate, whatever the case may be. He had a few minutes warning. He went out there and he made the most of it. And every single time that he got that opportunity to make the most of something, he made the most of it.
He did.
All the way to the end, man. I mean, so you just have to give it to the guy, just like what Billy said. I mean, other than Flair, who else did that?
Well, I mean, that leads me right into my next point of what Austin's legacy is in the business. And you just hit the nail on the head, is that he's a guy that paid his dues. Whatever opportunity he was given, he made the most of that opportunity and he hit it out of the park. I wouldn't say every time, but dang near close to it. I mean, he made his opportunities count. And I think one of the big things, I alluded to it just a minute ago, but I'll expound even further. I think that his legacy in the wrestling business, to me, Hulk Hogan was the 80s and he put wrestling on the map, and Austin took it to another stratosphere. I don't think there are too many other people that could have taken the wrestling business and modernized it and made it as attention grabbing. And I want to see what this guy is going to do this week. I can't believe what he did. Fill in the blank. That was Austin. He changed the game forever.
Well, the Monday Night Wars, he led WWE in the Monday Night Wars. He put them over and took them through it. So he led the way in doing that.
Yep. And
he was a leader. And from A to Z, where he was funny, serious, whatever. Yep. I mean, the thing with Kurt Angle and the cowboy hat and all that stuff, you know, and the things he done with Stephanie in the ring was just really, you know, it's really good.
Yep.
So he's the man. Besides Flair, I think he's the man.
I think that you have the 80s and the 90s, and then the 90s and the thousands. And I think that it took two people each time to make it work. It took Hogan on one side with Flair on the other. You had the big ego, the big mainstream, the big I'm in movies of Hogan, and then you had the hey, let's get it with Ric Flair. I'm the wrestler. I have all the skills. Then it came to the 90s and the 2000s, and you had, hey, here's Stone Cold. Who's going to be able to go with him? And you had, if you smell, you had The Rock coming out there, and everything that Stone Cold didn't bring, The Rock kind of brought it. So I think that it took both of those pairs to kind of escalate wrestling into what it became.
Yep.
Yeah,
I completely agree. Yep, I completely agree. So, Jared, again, you're setting me up for these transitions, and you don't even know it. It's fantastic. That leads me to talking about some of our favorite moments and memories of Stone Cold Steve Austin in matches. And honestly, Jared, one of my favorites is the stuff that Austin and Rock did together. Not the big time run for the WWF title, but for the Intercontinental title, when they did the beeper and when they threw the belts off the bridge and they did all this other stuff. That was some of my favorite stuff that Austin ever did. But topping the list for me, you guys know this. Again, I'm probably in the minority. Stunning Steve Austin, 1994 feud against Ricky Steamboat. To me, you can't get better than that. So that's some of my favorite stuff. Dad, what about you? When you think of Austin and matches and moments, what comes to your mind?
Him and Pillman was really a good tag team, and I think they shortchanged them. They got the titles, and they didn't get over like they thought they were going to, but they were still a really good tag team, and they worked together. And he was a really good friend with Pillman, and I think that they couldn't have pulled off the famous gun episode if they wasn't best friends. So
that's true.
I think he really after Pillman's wife died. After Pillman died, he checked on his wife and stuff like that. But you go down a different road, Pillman and all that. But Stone Cold was from A to Z. He covered every base.
He did. Jared, what about you?
Always in ring stuff with Vince, Stephanie, anybody he got in the ring with. It didn't make any difference. He made something out of it. So,
you look at Austin, and when you think of Austin, you can't help but think of Vince, and then you can't help but think of Pillman, and you can't help but think of Rock. So those names are synonymous with Steve Austin. That's for sure. Jared, I know you are a longtime Steve Austin fan, and just, we've talked, everything he touched turned to gold, and pick out a couple of those things that really stuck out to you about Austin and his career.
Well, let me address this first, because just as you all were talking, this is what kind of kept going through my head. Everybody talks about that they wish they'd seen Stone Cold versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Well, I wish that I would have seen Stunning Steve Austin versus the All-American, the yellow and red Hulk Hogan back in WCW, when they could both still work, before, Hogan's hips and back gave out, and then Stone Cold got dropped on his head, that stack of dimes. That's one thing that I always think about, that I wish they had covered more in this documentary, or that they do eventually. Other than that, man, I think it says something, just like what you all were talking about. Chris, you're into the figures the same way that I am. And the Ultimate Edition Stone Cold just came out, and what comes packaged in that figure around his neck that you have to really try to remove is that gold chain that Brian Pillman gave him. Yep. And he talks about it in every documentary that you will see Stone Cold in. They bring up Brian Pillman. He talks about, we got these gold necklaces. Brian, he had to go and get them gold necklaces. And he said, what's going to be our finisher, son? And so, it's crazy, the friendship that they had.
Yep.
And I wish that we could go more into detail of getting Stone Cold's feelings about what happened with Brian.
Yeah.
That's something I would be very interested in seeing.
Yep, I completely agree. You know, it's funny that we talk about how great Stone Cold was and how much he means to the wrestling business. His career in WWE only lasted 7 years. That's it. 7 years. And he completely turned the business on its head in 7 years.
Well, you just think Vince almost KO'd all this in the beginning.
Yep.
Because he didn't think Stone Cold was any good.
Not only that, but Stone Cold would not have won the King of the Ring had the curtain call not happened. Because if the curtain call happens or does not happen, Triple H wins the 96 King of the Ring. But instead, the curtain call happens, Stone Cold gets the nod, Austin 316 is born, and we're off to the races.
Well, one of the things I thought was interesting in the documentary, they give him a list of names, 3 pages of list of names they want him to be. And one of them was Snowman, Mr. Freeze, and Chili McFreeze.
And don't forget about Fang McFrost and Otto Von Ruthless. Yeah, those are my favorites.
Do you know how he got his name, Stone Cold?
Yeah, the tea. Yeah, his wife said that that needed to drink his tea or else it was going to turn stone cold.
And he said, "That's it."
That's it.
She named him.
Yeah, she did.
You go back timeline wise. I don't know how many Batman and Marvel comics and comic book fans we have, but you're talking about Mr. Freeze. Yeah. You had what was the dude's name? It was like the guy that it was right around the time that they had the Penguin and whatever his name was. This guy that was always into like turning things cold. That was one of his superpowers.
He was Dr. Victor Freeze.
Victor
was
Freeze.
his name.
Frost or something.
No, it was Victor Freeze.
Victor Freeze, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Victor Freeze.
And it looked like Stone Cold with that bald head and everything. Yep. So I just wonder in those glass, those bright blue eyes, I just wonder if that's what they were kind of going off of is, hey, hey, pal, this guy looks like Victor Freeze. Let's give him one of those names.
Right.
Thank God.
Imagine what the wrestling business would be with Otto Von Ruthless or Fame McFrost being the hottest star ever. Anyway, but that, Stone Cold Steve Austin was, a guy that really turned the business on its head in the 90s. And one guy that turned the business on its head in a different way in the 80s was the subject of the next documentary. And I'm talking about Roddy Piper. And for me, this documentary was really eye-opening because I didn't know a whole lot about his stuff in Georgia Championship Wrestling and out in California and out in Portland before he got to the WWF. I didn't know a whole lot about that. So I was really glad to see them really cover that extensively in this biography. Jared, I know that you and I have talked a lot about Piper. Did you know some of that stuff, or what was your familiarity with Piper, and what came out of that documentary that maybe you didn't know?
I just remember the first time I remember seeing Piper or really thinking, well, a couple different things. Okay, so I was a collector of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle figures and the X-Men figures back in the day. And so my papa had got me started into watching wrestling. And I go to, I think it was like Toy Biz or KB Toys or something back in the day that always had the little Hasbro WWF figures. Mm-hmm. And I see this man in a skirt. And I think, why on earth would, these people that watch wrestling, they're these big manly men. My papa, Marine in World War II. Why is he watching a product where they're selling a figure of a man in a skirt? So that was one of my first memories of Piper. And then you go to, I think it was WrestleMania 5. Was that whenever that he hosed down the guy that was smoking in the ring and kept blowing smoke in his face?
Yep, that was 5.
And so that was basically my knowledge of Piper. And then I kind of realized that at WrestleMania 1, he was in the main event and kind of just built on that. But I didn't really have any knowledge outside of WWF of Piper before this documentary.
Dad, you're an old school Georgia Championship Wrestling NWA kind of guy. Enlighten the both of us young fellers on your knowledge about Roddy Piper before his big time jump to New York.
Most of his titles and most of his championships that he won were in his early years. He only won one tag team title with Ric Flair, and only won the Intercontinental title one time. Never won a WWF title at all. Because his theory was, I'm here to fight, and I'm here to chew gum, and you're all out of it, or I'm all out of it. One. And he didn't take BS from anybody.
No.
And he was considered I seen a survey said that he was considered the best heel ever in wrestling.
It's hard to argue that. It's hard to argue because Hulk Hogan says in the documentary, I've got the quote here. He says that without Piper, there's no way that WWF gains the mainstream success they did, because he had to have somebody that opposed him had to make the people want to see Hogan kill this guy. And Piper was that guy. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that he was the greatest heel of all time.
Well, he wanted to put Hogan over. He wanted to put the business over. He didn't care where he won a title or not. Right. He just wanted to work. Right. And he was always that way. And he's schizophrenic. He'd be a good guy one time, heel the next time. But he was really good at what he did. But he like a lot of others, paid a lot of price because he really hurt his body. I mean, he wasn't the greatest in-ring performer, but he was a great talker, and he knew what he was doing when he got in there.
Well, that's one of the things that I was going to say, but go ahead, Jared. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask both the Belchers here. What was Piper's finishing move? Was it the sleeper hold?
Sleeper hold.
Yeah, sleeper hold. Sleeper hold.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I'd always wondered that. For some reason, I felt like it was the sleeper hold, and then it became a pile driver. I don't know why I thought that, but
he may have used the pile driver some too. That kind of sticks out to me as well. But no, it was definitely the sleeper hold, because that's how Brett beat him at WrestleMania 8, and then that's also WrestleMania 3 when he put Adrian Adonis to sleep so we could see the debut of BTFBB, so he could cut Adrian Adonis's hair.
I love how Piper would hold one side of his head, and that's to protect where that your mandible connects with your skull. If you hit somebody there, a lot of times it's an immediate KO. That's how whenever I weighed 140 pounds, I KO'd a 220-pound, 6'2" guy. Was I hit him right where that mandible connected to the skull, and that's what I was trying to do. And if you watch Piper in the early days, he'd put his hand right there protecting that, and then he'd jab with this hand.
It's interesting.
Kind of cool that he incorporated a real life fact into the way that he would fight.
Well, I guess reason why that happened, and you want to know something about old school about him, when him and Greg Valentine had the dog collar match, he lost 50 to 75% earring in his ear, where it broke his. That's why he did this all the time. And that was early on in Georgia Championship Wrestling when he hurt his ear real bad. And he went through it all his life with that hearing impairment.
Yep.
So
maybe that was why he did it, instead of trying to be realistic and cover up that sweet knockout spot.
Right.
Well, that's true too. You never knew what you were going to get with him.
Well, that's true. That again, y'all are just leading me to my next points. It's crazy. You never knew what you were going to get with Roddy Piper. And to me, that's his legacy in the wrestling business. Is not, Dad, you mentioned it earlier, maybe his in-ring skills weren't the best, but when you give him a live microphone, you did not know what you were going to get. It's like Roddy Piper was a ticking time bomb with a microphone. And not that, people had scripts back then or anything, but Roddy, you had to trust him to get over what he said he was going to get over and not go off the rails. And there were a lot of times where Piper went off the rails. I'm not saying that his legacy was going off the rails or anything. I'm just saying that one of the best mic guys in the history of the wrestling business, bar none, to me.
Speaking of going off the rails, that segment that he had at WrestleMania 5 with Robert Downey Jr., that was not supposed to have went anywhere near as long as what it
Correct.
did.
Yes, that's correct.
He changed in midstream. When he felt something was going to happen, he wanted it to happen. Well, that's what he did. So he's a smart guy. He's a really smart guy.
Dad, what do you think Piper's legacy is in the wrestling business, if you had to sum it up?
All he wanted to do was work and put the business over and do whatever it takes to put the business over. That's what he did. He didn't worry about himself winning a title. He just wanted to work and put the business over. And he liked to talk.
Yeah. I mean, he had an impact. He had an impact on everybody just, with what he did with that. He wanted to put the wrestling business over it, and he did that in an incredible, impactful way. Jared, what about you? What do you think Piper's like? We often talk about, is he the greatest ever to not win the WWF championship or whatever? Is that his legacy, or what do you think?
I think that his legacy is that he portrayed 100% to a T exactly what a heel wrestler should be on a mainstream nationwide program before anybody else did.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I
agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, somebody had to be in that spot, and Hogan said he couldn't have done it without Piper, and Piper made the most of it. Just like we talked about Austin earlier, Piper made the most of his spots, and Piper's spotlight just happened to be nobody else had got into that, mainstream realm, and Piper did the movies, and he came back, and all those other things. One of the things that they left out, though, that I want to touch on briefly before we move on, one of the things that I noticed they left out that I wish they would have talked a whole lot more about was my real, I don't want to say introduction to Roddy Piper, but where I became the most familiar with Roddy Piper. And unfortunately, that was in WCW in his 96 and 97 run. And I know that's not the best part of Piper's career, but as a young guy or as a young kid in 95, 96, 97, those things are imprinted in my brain. I remember vividly the introduction to the Super Brawl pay-per-view in 97 where Piper's in Alcatraz. He breaks out of Alcatraz and he goes to fight Hogan. So they didn't talk hardly at all about his WCW stuff. And Piper is one of those guys where he had a mainstream spot, a big time spot at WrestleMania 12 in March. And then that was WWF's big show of the year. And then he appeared on WCW's biggest show of the year, Starrcade, later that year when he faced Hogan. So them not talking about that, I really wanted to know more about maybe how that happened or why that happened or just more details about all that. That's just me, though.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean,
I was kind of pausing because I thought Billy might have some insight on that.
No, I don't have no insight on that. I mean, he kindly walked by his own tune from WWE, WWF to WCW, Georgia Championship Wrestling, wherever he thought he could do good at, that's where he went to.
That's true.
And the thing about it is, back in WrestleMania 2, when he was 1 and 2, he would not take a fall for Mr. T. I don't know if you know it or not, but
that was really interesting to hear them talk about the whole Mr. T situation and and all that kind of stuff. That was pretty interesting for sure. Jared, anything else you want to add about Piper before we move on to the next guy?
I mean, other than just he was probably Stone Cold before there was a Stone Cold. He was the renegade, the guy that pushed the envelope before there was ever a Stone Cold that came along. So I think that's why he made it so big and why that we all still remember him.
Yep, that's true. He was all 8 of these guys are one of a kind in their own ways. And I think nobody personifies that more than Roddy Piper. The next biography that aired in this A&E series is the Macho Man Randy Savage.
Quick question, Rick. I'm going to interrupt you. And in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, it says live. I was just making sure that we are, in fact, recording.
We are recording. That's why it says live.
Wait.
Good grief.
I'm not putting Ric Flair on one of these things, okay? I don't know what all this stuff means. I just go with it.
Yes, where it says live, that means we're recording. And if you're just now joining us, that's a perfect segue for me to tell you that this is the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for checking us out. We release episodes every Monday and Thursday. You can follow us all over social media. We are at PBW Podcast. Subscribe. Give us 5 stars, whether you're watching on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, all the things. Make sure you subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. All right, on to the matter at hand. The next contestant, ooh, yeah, the Macho Man, Randy Savage. And, I really didn't realize we're all from the head of a holler in Eastern Kentucky. And I did not, right? I did not realize that the Macho Man really made his independent wrestling name in Kentucky, in the Louisville and Lexington area.
I got a story.
That's where the Poffos ran all of their stuff. And I literally did not know that. Jared, what's your story? Go ahead.
So this guy I work with, I'm not going to mention his name just because I don't know if he wants this told or what, but everybody knows I like wrestling at work. So they tell me different things about wrestling or ask my opinion or, whatever. So anyways, this guy I work with, he's been everywhere. And he said that one day he was in Kentucky, and I don't know what part of Kentucky or whatever, but he was driving on the road. And that somebody kept kind of swerving around him and just kind of acting crazy. And he was kind of starting to get pissed off. And so anyways, I don't know if he flagged the driver over or what happened, but somehow they go to the side of the road and these two bulls are getting ready to lock horns. And who comes out of the car that's trailing this guy and aggravating him, this guy I work with, but, whoa, I'm going to kill you. And out comes the Macho Man. And he has a lady friend with him that just so happens to know my friend and kind of breaks the whole thing up and says, hey, I know both of y'all. Hey, y'all are both cool. Let's just act like this didn't happen type thing. But I just thought it was crazy that right here, like you said, in Kentucky, this happened. You have a crazy driver behind you that's just acting erratic, and you flag him over because you want to whip somebody's hind end for aggravating you, and out pops Savage. And he said, I don't know what I would have done if this female hadn't broke it up. Because this dude's a pretty big guy that I know. But Savage, he would not have known what to do with him, is what he said.
Yeah, Savage is one of a kind, man. I talked about ticking time bomb with Roddy Piper. The Macho Man is the epitome of a ticking time bomb, just because of his attitude, his demeanor, his paranoia, and all this other stuff. I'm going to get to a question about that here in just a little bit. But a lot of people really, there's differing opinions on Randy Savage. A lot of people loved him, thought he was the greatest person ever. And then you had a lot of people who he was really protective of Liz and he locked her in the locker room and, all this other stuff. He just had a very fascinating career. And it seems to me like it was fascinating long before he got to the WWF. And then when he got to the WWF, that fascinating career just took on a big national spotlight, and that paranoia got bigger and all that other stuff. I'm going to save that for in a minute, though. Dad, what about the Macho Man stood out to you in this documentary that maybe you didn't know, something you might have learned about him?
His first persona, he wrestled under a mask. In his first match, he was called himself the Spider.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
That wasn't mentioned in the documentary. But other than that, they really didn't leave anything out. I don't think they talked about his dad and his early life enough. But, of course, I don't think, they talked about him playing baseball. And then when he didn't make a Cardinals, he took off his bats and broke them and said he was going to be a wrestler. And the Macho Man was 24/7, 110%, full of energy all the time.
Right.
One way, forward. He had no backward. He was always forward. If That's it was true. Wrestling, if it was Liz, if it was hitting a baseball, or if it was just doing whatever, he did nothing little. He was always intense.
Right.
24/7.
That's so true. And that came over in his promos. That came over in his matches. It came over in his personal life too. There were a lot of people in the wrestling business, a lot of people that commented in this documentary that they didn't know what the actual Randy Savage speaking voice was. All they heard was that intense Macho Man voice. And I didn't know what his real voice sounded like, kind of thing. So that's really interesting to me. Savage definitely has a tremendous legacy in the business, good, bad, or indifferent. Whether it is Jared, we've talked about this before, the rumors of why he left WWF and why he was blackballed for so long, and whether that's true or not true, and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, Jared, what do you think the Macho Man's legacy is in the wrestling business, if you had to kind of sum it up?
I think that other than Ric Flair, he was the first person that started most likely paying out of his own pocket for these extravagant ring ensembles.
Yep.
So you go back to WrestleMania 4, and each time he came out, he was wearing a different outfit.
It was,
and that was basically unheard of back in the day. And, Shawn did it, and Flair did it. I guess even kind of maybe Undertaker, if you stop and think about it.
Sure.
Has done it. But it just seems like maybe Savage was the first of those to kind of do it to the level that he did, other than Ric Flair. And Ric Flair, the NWA was not quite at the level that WWF was. So maybe you can make the argument that Savage was the first to do it on a national scale.
It was really interesting in the documentary too, because they actually had his costume designer interviewed in the documentary, and that was really interesting to hear him talk about the evolution of Randy's gear and stuff like that. And you're right, coming out of his own pocket for it. Dad, what do you think as far as the legacy of Randy Savage in the wrestling business?
Well, I think the thing that sticks out to me the most is he did his persona 24/7. He didn't walk through the door and turn it off.
Right.
When he walked through the door, he was still Randy Savage. When he walked back out, he was still Randy Savage. He did that. And he was so intense. And even the match with Ricky Steamboat, the 5-star match, Belcher did the 5-star. But it was really good match. I mean, that match sticks out to me because he had a legal pad, and they went over every move and knew what he did. He only did that to Steamboat. He did that to Hogan too, and Hogan would just throw it off. He didn't want to do that. Hogan is. If he ain't Hogan's way, it ain't the right way.
That's right.
So I just think he just didn't let himself be known. And I think toward the end, his brother said he had to learn how to let go of that voice he had. I can't do Randy Savage. But he said he done it so long, he couldn't hardly let it go. Finally, in the end, he did. He let it go, his brother did. So he's just the most intense performer that I've ever seen.
I agree with that.
I mean, he was really, he didn't have no real standout finishing move, but his in-ring performance was just unmatched. He was really good and intense.
Well, I'll push back on the standout finishing move, because maybe it wasn't devastating, and maybe it wasn't, the most, I don't know, the flashiest thing. But you tell me any wrestling fan who was a kid at any point in their life did not jump off of something and drop the Macho Man Randy Savage flying elbow. I mean, Dad, I've hit you so many times with a flying elbow. Jared, I know you've been the recipient of my flying elbow. I'm just saying, I don't think there's a kid out there that was a wrestling fan that didn't drop a Macho Man elbow.
Well, I agree with you. I forgot about the elbow. I just think when he come off the top and did the double axe handle on top of her head, that wasn't really. I mean, as far as having a stinger splash or
his
deathlock,
his move set wasn't elaborate. But he didn't need
quick.
it.
He was quick, and he was strong, and he was a really smart guy. People just didn't give him credit because he would not let nobody in.
That's true. You mentioned the Steamboat match, and that's actually not one of my favorite matches. If I had to pick some Randy Savage matches, I would actually go with his match. Jared, I know you're shaking your head. I'm going to give you the chance to talk. His match at WrestleMania 8 against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. I was a fan of that one. WrestleMania 5 against Hogan. Big fan of that one. And then probably the best match that the Ultimate Warrior ever had was WrestleMania 7 against the Macho Man Randy Savage. Jared, what about you? What matches stick out to you when you think of the Macho Man?
Definitely the Royal Rumble match against Slaughter whenever it was Slaughter against Ultimate Warrior, and Savage came out with that
Yes.
that
Scepter.
gold embroidered jewel thing and just smacked old Warrior right across the top of the head.
Right.
Cost him the championship, which then I think kind of led up to this career versus career match against the Warrior.
It did.
So that whole scenario sticks out. And then, honestly, I think a lot of Savage against Flair in WCW stands out to me.
Yeah. They had some great stuff in WCW too, no doubt. All right, before we wrap up about the Macho Man, I have to bring this up because a lot of people were really vocal about their feelings on this specific documentary and how it was different than the previous two that had been released. Stone Cold's documentary and Piper's documentary got rave reviews. Everybody was huge fans. And then everybody was really upset when the Savage documentary came out because they thought it was a hit piece on Savage because of all the comments that Gorgeous George made, talking about Savage's steroid use and his drug use and how his paranoia got to a completely other level. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because I didn't really think it was that bad, because I think that was an important part of the story to tell, because I think that really led to him coming out on the other side and then marrying his high school sweetheart later in life and really finding peace with himself. I think you had to go to that rock bottom, and that needed to be told. So I was okay with it. A lot of people were not. But here's what I want to say. He was a lot bigger in his late 90s run when he had Gorgeous George with him. I mean, he was jacked. He was on steroids, obviously. That was true. We hear a lot about Savage's paranoia, again, well documented, and supposedly it got worse as his career went on. Remember all the paranoia stories that we used to hear about Chris Benoit as well? Like, I'm not saying that Randy was capable of what Benoit did, because, what Benoit did was despicable and it's hard to talk about. But I can see how Randy would display some of those paranoia behaviors and some stuff like that because of his steroid use. What's your thoughts on not would Randy do something like that, but do you think I'm off base in thinking that because of the paranoia that Randy already had, combine that with the steroid use? Jared, what do you think? You're in the medical field. You got any insight on that?
A lot of drugs that you can do, especially like cocaine, which was the drug of choice for a lot of wrestlers back in the day in those 80s and even maybe the early 90s. Maybe after the early 90s, it became like some rendition of meth, which meth and cocaine are both very strong stimulants. Well, the problem is that from everything I've read and what I've seen and, seen people deal with in, working in the medical field, seen patients deal with and heard what they've said, is these stimulants, whenever they wear off and, everything is at go, 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 it's like you drop. And then you almost go down to like this bottom of the barrel, and it leads to paranoia. And so I think that if you look at a lot of what was said about Savage and Hogan and some of these other guys, if you look at the promos, Road Warrior Hawk, I mean, look at Dr. Death, Steve Williams. They're on some kind of stimulants from everything that I've read and the way it looks. And, I don't know these guys, so I'm not saying that's a fact. But right. From everything that I've read. And so I think that two of your guys that had this problem were Chris Benoit and Macho Man Randy Savage. And if you look at Benoit, he wasn't like outgoing, like, oh, yeah, but he was always on. And the crippler, and he'd shake as he did the throat slashing thing, These were two guys that were always on some sort of high, it looked like. And so that can lead to paranoia from everything I know about it when you come down from that high.
Dad, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's personal off. he wandered around a while. He wandered around a while after, him and Liz split. And he kindly, I think he didn't really show it, but I think that hurt him a lot. Cause after she passed away, he talked about her, how much he cared about her and her family. I think that hurt him a whole lot. And then when he met this other girl, Gorgeous George, I think she was, what can I say, the kettle calling the pot black, because she was not a very good person from what and she just led him down the wrong path. And you take someone like Randy that's so intense already, and you have to start adding more stuff to it. And she's probably there saying, okay, let's do this, let's do this, do that. And he just got to the point that I don't think he would ever went, like you said, Chris, I think he would do Benoit. But if anybody would, it would be him.
Yeah.
But just like Jared said, all these people we're talking about, they're Hall of Famers. Some of them are 2-time Hall of Famers.
Yep.
But one common thread almost every one of them has. They always took a pill. They always took a steroid. They always had stimulants to wake up and to go to sleep, and pain pills. It was all, if you're wrestling 300 days out of 365 days or 350 days, you're going to do something.
Yep.
And it's just like rock and roll people. And I watched a documentary on Johnny Cash. He did the same way. Look what happened to Elvis. You take something, you take something, you take something. And that all wrestlers did more because what they did was real.
Yep.
It
was real pain.
Yeah, everything was predetermined, but it was real pain.
Yep.
And if you take enough pain pills and you get immune to them, then you got to step up and do something else.
Yep.
And you add Randy's paranoia on top of that, and that's just not a good, but I'm glad that he did. And I didn't think that they run over him too bad. I think, they just told the story.
Yep.
And if you're going to tell a biography, tell the whole story.
That's exactly right.
Then in the end, he says, okay, I'm in a better place. I'm at my high school sweetheart. Everything's going good. Everything's fine. He ended in a better place. And most of the guys do.
Yep. And that's great too, because it was nice. You're exactly right. And I said it a minute ago. I feel like you have to tell the whole story. You could not leave this part out of Randy's story. And another guy, the next subject of the documentary is one where you have to tell the whole story. And you talk about somebody making it out on the other side, and that's Booker T. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm going to preface this. I was skeptical in seeing the list of all 8 guys that they were going to have documentaries on. Booker T's name sticks out for the simple fact of which one of these is not like the other. And I feel like Booker T was there. But man, when you watch this biography, I was captivated by his story. His story is something that Hollywood script writers could only dream about putting together. What this guy went through with his mom passing away, being an orphan basically with his sister, and begging the utility companies not to shut their water and their electricity off, and how poor he was, and then some of the choices that he made, going and robbing. I'm sure you guys have the stat, but robbing the same Wendy's restaurant that he worked at 26 times, I'm pretty sure, and not getting caught. Finally getting caught in the end, serving his time in prison, coming out on the other side. I don't want to spoil the whole thing for anybody that hasn't watched it, but Jared, Booker T's story is one that's unlike any other. It's incredible to see him now be a 2-time Hall of Famer after all of that.
Yeah, and it was a very captivating story. The only thing that I still am a little confused on is just like you said, I think that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame and his accolades, but I don't think he's going to go down being remembered the way that some of the other guys who have had these biographies made of them are going to be remembered. And that's my only complaint is you have so many wrestlers that have these great stories, but they didn't end up at the top for quite a while at one point to achieve this success that we think is necessary
Sure.
To elevate these guys the way we do. And I don't
Sure.
think Booker ever reached that.
No.
I think that this was an out-of-place biography. I mean, it's one that I loved, but do you pile him in with all these other people? I do think it's still this one's not like the others.
Sure, and I think so too, but I think it was so much that his story is so captivating that it was something different than, let's just say, oh, I grew up a wrestling fan and I started training and I paid my dues and yada, 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 yada. No, this was one where like he really had to overcome personal, demons and personal things way outside of the wrestling business. And the wrestling business was his escape from all those things. Most of the guys had problems after they got in the wrestling business. Bookers, for the majority of his career, it was all before. Yeah. So to me, that's just why that his story belongs. But you're right, as far as the wrestling legacy goes, maybe it doesn't belong. But as far as a story goes, I think it fits right in. Dad, what was your thoughts on Booker T and this whole story, I guess?
What's the Hollywood script to go from where he started to where he got to, where he ended, and where he's at now? And I still think by watching this story, and it was a great story, and I really like it, and I learned some things on it, about him. He served time in jail, and now he has a son. His son by his first wife, he's in and out of jail too. So I guess the thing he said about Booker T is he's always reaching, trying to get that higher point in his life. And he's got to the point now where he's there. But I agree with Jerry too. His wrestling legacy, and I read up on it, it's really good. He's won a lot of titles. A lot of titles. He did really good in the WCW. But I think now, he's at the point when he has a wrestling school. He owns a wrestling school. Him and his brother, Stevie Ray. Yep. So I'm like Jared, though. There's still something there, just a little bit that's hanging out there that he ain't attained yet. Yeah. But I think the story is a Hollywood script, and he is really from rags to riches. That's a real good story. He really did himself, and he didn't give up. That's
true. One of the things that they left out of the documentary that I want to ask you guys about, Jared, I'll start with you on this. To me, if you look at Booker T's legacy, obviously he's a two-time Hall of Famer. His run with Stevie Ray and Harlem Heat is, they were one of the greatest tag teams in the 90s in WCW. Nobody's going to question that. When he got the WWE and he did his singles run, he did some fantastic things. He had his King Booker stuff with his wife, and he did some of his stuff with Goldust was still my favorite. I love his, the funny stuff he did with Goldust. But one of the things that they left out of the documentary, Jared, is his one world title shot at WrestleMania. His big spotlight moment at a WrestleMania was against Triple H in 2003 during Triple H's reign of terror, and they left it out. Obviously, there's been some rumor and innuendo through the years that there was some racial undertones with some of Triple H's promos and some of what he was talking about and that kind of thing. Why do you think that's why they left it out, or do you think it was just? The only thing I'll push back on that before I let you answer is they talked about the N-word promo that when he called Hogan the N-word. So I just don't know if that's why they left the Triple H stuff out. I don't know. What do you think?
I do think that's the reason why they left it out. Look at today's world and all the stuff that's going on, and you can kind of see how that would not be the best light for WWE to be portrayed in, to be rubbing up against the type of tones that it seemed like Triple H was making at the time.
Right.
And, the thing is the way they presented all that, I don't think it would have been as bad if Booker T would have beat Triple H. But you have Triple H saying all this stuff that you should not say about anybody,
right?
And or insinuating it. And then he goes on to beat this guy. And, that this guy never gets retribution. This guy being Booker T, pronouns pal. So I just think they didn't show it because it would make WWE look bad, honestly.
Dad, do you have any thoughts on that specific thing being left out or anything else that you thought of that they didn't talk about with Booker?
Well, to piggyback on what Jared said there, I think that, of course, in today's time, that stuff wouldn't fly. It's politically incorrect, as they say. I think where WWE is a publicly owned company, there would be way too much pushback if they tried to, put that out there and show that. So I think that that's probably has a lot to do with it. But, it is what it is. But I think there's a couple of things that I found out that Booker T and Batista had a fight, a real live fight. They were shooting commercials for SummerSlam.
I don't think I knew this.
And they were shooting commercials for SummerSlam, and one said something to the other, another said that, and they got in a fight, and they had to pull them apart.
Wow.
And Kurt Angle was telling this. I seen this on the interview. He said it was a much to do about nothing. He said, but they really had a fight. And and the other thing I found out interesting, and I didn't know this. I didn't know Booker T was in the TNA. I didn't know he did some time in TNA.
That's right. He was the Legends champion for a while. He was in the main event Mafia with Sting and Nash and those guys.
He introduced that belt, the Legends,
Right.
But I didn't know that. That was a couple of things that I did, say. But it's an interesting documentary biography. It's really good, though.
It really is. And all of these biographies, we're not going to go through and tell you everything that happens in them because obviously we want you to watch them for yourself, and we can't do justice what A&E has done and WWE has done in putting these stories together. But Booker T is certainly a fascinating story, whether you think he's the greatest of all time or not. Obviously, most wrestling fans do not, but the story nonetheless stands alone, speaks for itself. Jared, you got any Booker T memories that stick out to you, or maybe a match that you favor over other Booker T matches or anything like that, really?
I loved Booker T and Harlem Heat. I loved their music. I loved the way that they would portray him and Stevie Ray, like their outfits and wearing the bandanas. And they're, like I said, their interest music. That was one of the best things. I can still picture in WCW Booker T and Stevie Ray coming out and that awesome entrance music playing, and then that fire shooting up from the stage.
Yeah.
That was just a very cool presentation. And one thing that I would have liked to have seen that I don't know if it ever happened, maybe you guys do, is I know that it was Harlem Heat against the Road Warriors. I know that happened, but I don't remember Booker T or Stevie Ray ever receiving the Doomsday Device, or I don't remember LOD really receiving Harlem Heat's finisher, but that's something I would have liked to have seen that I don't remember ever seeing.
I think in the 90s, they were, it was around 95, 96 where the Road Warriors did their stint in WCW where Harlem Heat was there. And it seemed like they were already trying to push Booker by himself, or maybe Stevie Ray was hurt. Maybe there's, that I don't know, but Booker T teamed with a bunch of different guys. I do know that Sting and Booker T faced the Road Warriors in a street fight at an uncensored pay-per-view once. So I think that's as close as Booker T got to the Road Warriors, or as far as Harlem Heat got. I could be wrong though. Send your hate tweets to @ChrisBelcher24 if I'm wrong. But that's what I remember as far as the Road Warriors and Harlem Heat. Dad, do you remember anything different?
No, I think, like Jared said, their entrance was really good.
Yep.
And they were really top tag team until Stevie Ray got hurt. Booker, when the final WCW before Vince bought him, he left as the TV champion and the world champion.
Yep.
So he took those belts with him to the
WWF.
To WWF. So,
yep.
And one thing that I'll say about him that I on some interviews that I seen that he was a great locker room guy, like the Undertaker.
Yeah.
And that goes back to where we were talking about the race thing like that.
Yeah.
He was a big enough man to, who knows what's in his mind, but everybody said he was a great locker room guy.
We are going to push the pause button on this episode. We've gone just a little over an hour, and we've talked about 4 fantastic A&E biographies: Stone Cold Steve Austin, Rowdy Roddy Piper, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and my personal favorite of the 4 biographies, Booker T. Again, if you haven't watched these biographies, make sure that you go back and do that. All of them are must see. All of them have incredible stories. So I encourage you, please make sure if you have the A&E app and you have a cable provider, you can just log right in and watch on the app. If you have a good, if you've DVR'd them, make sure you go check it out. If you have a good on-demand selection for your cable provider, make sure you go check that out as well. If you don't have cable, you might be up a creek. But in any event, make sure that you watch all of these biographies. They are can't miss. I guarantee you will learn something about each one of these wrestlers. So we're going to put a pause on this episode, and we will rejoin part 2 next Monday. So we'll cover Shawn Michaels, we'll cover Mick Foley, we'll cover the ever controversial Ultimate Warrior, and then we'll round it out with Bret the Hitman Hart. So that'll be next Monday. We'll pick back up with these biographies. It's a can't miss episode. Thanks again to my dad, for Billy Belcher, for hopping on and joining us. He's a great addition to the show, provides a lot of great insight. So we really appreciate him jumping on. I can't talk tonight. My goodness. Appreciate him jumping on and joining us for these 2 episodes. As always, next Thursday, you will get your regularly scheduled Pipe Bomb Wrestling podcast, where we're going to talk about the main roster and catch you up on everything that happened on Raw and SmackDown and NXT and all those kind of things. So make sure you check us out every Monday and Thursday, where you will get brand new content each and every week. Follow us on social media. We are at PBW Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow me. I am at Chris Belcher 24. I will flash it up there on the screen for you so you can see it. That's where you can follow me everywhere on social media as well. As I said, our new episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. There's something for everybody. If you like your podcast in a traditional audio format, make sure that you subscribe on Apple Podcast, Google Play, on Anchor, on Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, we are there. Make sure you search for us. Make sure you subscribe and give us that 5-star review. We appreciate that very much. If you enjoy our show on YouTube, if you enjoy seeing our awesome backgrounds and our smiling faces, we appreciate your subscription there as well. Just hit the little bell there for your subscription, and you'll get a notification every time that a new episode drops. We greatly appreciate your support. And we would like you to hop on over to ProWrestlingTees.com/PBW podcast. That's the best way to support the show, is buy yourself a t-shirt. There's 4 great selections up there. And again, we appreciate it very much. Your support means the world to us. So follow us on social media, subscribe on your favorite platform. Make sure you check us out every Monday and Thursday. For my brother from another mother, Jared Justice, our special guest, my dad, Billy Belcher, I am Chris Belcher. Thanks again for checking out the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, and we will catch you guys down the road.